Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 185.
There's a big need for Wi-Fi people all over the U.S. I see that at 7Signal constantly. Is just a general lack of, or a lot of organizations that are just, we had a Wi-Fi guy for a while, but then we lost him. Now we don't have anybody.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Welcome back. This is Wireless LAN Professionals, and my name is Keith Parsons. And today I have Jim Vajda of 7Signal with me. Jim, how are you doing?
Very good. Good to be here. Long-time listener. Happy to be on the show.
Well, glad you're here. I thought today we could, we just finished a webinar together on 7Signal like minutes ago. So if you want to see that, you can go to 7Signal's website and download their latest webinar on wireless LAN troubleshooting.
Yeah, you can hear me squirm when they ask me a question about BSS coloring. Ouch, that was a tough one.
That was a very precise question. Like, I don't know, go look in the standard, man.
Yeah, they wanted to know the thresholds, and man, that was off the top of my head. Oh, tough one.
Yeah, but that's okay. Well, I won't ask you nearly as difficult of questions.
Excellent.
Or at least I'll try. So, first of all, you're a CWNE number?
CWNE 183. Got it back in 2016.
Yeah, I've been working on it a long time.
That was my goal, actually, to beat 200.
And you made it. Yeah, I have guys whose goals want to be 404, just because it's an easy one to remember. I don't know how you plan that, but that would work.
802 would be a big one.
That would be a big one as well. Oh, years ago, I used to have a friend who had ethernet.com as a URL and then ended up trying to upsell it. And then all of a sudden, there's all the other top-level domains, and no one wanted it anymore. It's like, hung on a little too long. Anyway, I thought we could talk about your journey from where you were until where you're doing now. In what your title is, Director of Global Engagement? I forget.
Director of Global Wi-Fi Solutions at 7Signal. So I mostly do sales engineering, yeah.
But that's a cool title to have for being in sales engineering. So how did you get to where you are?
Right. So I sort of cut my teeth in networking and Wi-Fi in K-12 public school district. And it was around the time that one-to-one programs were taking off, where we were deploying that one computer or laptop or tablet per student. And of course, it was all wireless. And so we needed to deploy a new high-density Wi-Fi network into an environment that had previously been served with, a handful of airport extremes, and good luck. So, working in K-12 IT, you get to do absolutely everything. If it plugs into the wall or has a battery in it, you're responsible for it. And so I got to get a taste of everything. I did server work, virtualization, networking, Wi-Fi, applications, WAN, all that stuff. And I really discovered that Wi-Fi was what I loved to do more than anything else. So I started down the path of CWNP certifications and vendor certifications, and I started down that career path as well. So after the school district, I worked for a MSP, regional MSP, and did a lot of networking and Wi-Fi projects there, which was great to see other environments outside of K-12. And then I went to work for a regional healthcare system and did hospital Wi-Fi for a couple of years, which was really taking it to a whole nother level, and enjoyed that. And then I made the jump to 7Signal, and that's where I am today.
Along the way, you've also had a blog. So what was your trigger to start your first blog article?
I think a lot of it, a lot of it was, I'm a believer that you don't really understand a concept until you can teach it and you can explain it. And so blogging was a way for me to put my thoughts and ideas about Wi-Fi out there and explain them and sort of, revise it over and over and change wording and, oh, is that really true? Interrogate my own thoughts, so that I knew that the stuff I was putting out there, things I was saying to clients and customers was correct. And I also, Wi-Fi guys were usually, we're somewhat isolated. Usually we might be the only Wi-Fi guy in an organization. So we need to use blogs and Twitter and Slack and things like that to network with each other and share ideas. Because often you can't just, lean over the cube next to you and say, hey, what do you think about Hotspot 2.0? Right? Because nobody knows anything about that unless you're in our little world. So yeah, that's how I got started with that. And I still have that personal blog at framebyframewifi.net.
Started in January of 2015 with Hotspot 2.0 as the first topic. I like that. I think one of the best things people in this industry can do is start their own blog. If no one reads it but yourself, it's still valuable. I constantly go back and read my own articles because my brain isn't big enough to remember all the things. And I look at it and went, I knew this once, but I can forget about it because I know I can go back and find the details anytime in the future. So thanks for starting a blog and keeping up to date and posting when you have new cool things.
You're welcome.
Well, at 7, oh yeah, no problem. I think everyone needs to be along that way. And on Twitter, you are?
At Jim Vajda, JimVajda.
I like when it's a name, then you don't have to remember who's the Wi-Fi guru _space 2 S's, 7 S's. Just your name works. And it kind of, it's a nice placeholder. So at 7 Signal, 7 Signal has two, main product lines, the sensor-based and the client-based. I'm a firm believer that the client-based troubleshooting is the future, because the client knows everything about it. I mean, it's right there doing all the work while it's going. So your client-based tool is called Mobileye. Can you give us a quick rundown of the difference between SAFA I, which is a sensor, and Mobileye?
Yeah, and I agree with what you just said about client-based troubleshooting being, probably the most important. So our first product was SAFA I, and it is a hardware-based sensor. It looks like an AP. You mount it to the ceiling, just like an AP. Run Ethernet to it. It is powered over PoE, and it has its nice a cloud management dashboard, and it runs tests against the Wi-Fi network. And it's got a spectrum analyzer, so it's constantly recording performance metrics, RF metrics. The spectrum analysis data itself gets stored, so you get that layer 1 all and up view of the network, and historical data. So when it comes time to troubleshoot something, or really, I like to talk about SAFA I interrogating the infrastructure. That's its purpose. Is my WLAN doing what it's supposed to do? Are we meeting our requirements? Are the APs constantly beaconing? Is there a source of non-Wi-Fi interference? And that's its purpose. It's very good at it. It's also great for remote troubleshooting because it's got that full suite of tools. Your spectrum analyzer, you can do a remote packet capture from it. You can run active tests. So you can deploy them in different areas and access them remotely when you want to do some active troubleshooting. But Mobileye is our software-based solution. It's entirely software-based, and it runs on end-user devices. It supports the big 4 operating systems, so Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. And it almost turns the client into a sensor itself. So we're recording passive metrics from the client device. We get signal strength, data rate, AP that it's associated with, and more. Actually, we're just starting down the road of dissecting beacon frames from the client. So we're getting station counts and channel utilization from that QBSS load information element, and we're getting AP names if a vendor's advertising the name of the AP in the beacon too. So we're just getting started with that, but there's a lot of cool stuff we'll be able to get from that too. But Mobileye also runs active tests, so it can ping certain endpoints. Just pinging the gateway, that's one of my favorite troubleshooting tools, and Mobileye does that as well, right? If you can ping the gateway, you've got layer 3 connectivity, and your Wi-Fi is working.
Which means it's must working. Yeah.
Yeah, you may not have a lot of throughput. That's a different question, but your Wi-Fi is working if you can ping the gateway. And then we can also do web download tests, throughput tests, and for some platforms we have a VoIP test where we simulate a voice call and calculate a MOS score for you. And it's really beneficial because you're getting this the real performance of the Wi-Fi network as it's colored by the client's own capability and performance as well. So SAFA I tells you how the infrastructure does on its own. Mobileye adds the client perspective as well and the client capabilities as well, so that you can really start weeding out and identifying if you have some problem clients in your organization that need remediation.
Can you, is Mobileye made, I'm setting you up on this question, is Mobileye made for the end user to look at that, or is it remotely accessible from a dashboard?
Oh yeah, good question. So it's invisible to the end user. For Windows, it's a headless service. For Mac OS, it's just a daemon that runs in the background, and all the test results, all the data from it gets uploaded to a cloud dashboard where administrators log in and look at individual devices or aggregate reports. So that's how it works.
I would advocate making it more, not headless, but so the end user can see what's going on. Because end users can solve a lot of, if the end user knows it's not wireless, then they won't call support saying it's wireless.
Well, that is a topic of discussion that we've had for a while. It's certainly potential for something we'll do in the future. Because wouldn't it be nice if, but wouldn't it be nice if instead of an end user just kind of throwing up their hands and saying whatever they say, the Wi-Fi stinks, my computer stinks, whatever, they just got a little pop-up that said, call the help desk and tell them DHCP is not working. You can't get an IP address. That would be nice for the end user because they could say, hey, I have a DHCP problem, so they'd feel a little bit empowered. But then for the network team that ultimately gets that ticket, it's so great to have something really valuable in that.
What's that term? Mean time to resolution. It would really lower that mean time to resolution because then you wouldn't have to go through. How many times you call tech support and they go, have you turned it on and off? Do you have this? And they start through the script when most of that could be solved way sooner in the cycle. But that's a different business model. So I won't be pushing. I just thought it was a cool idea if we could, solve that in a different place.
Yeah, we think it's a cool idea too. So we'll see.
We'll see. No announcements here. We're not talking about any product. But for you personally, Jim, what's your next certification, next training you're looking to do in your life?
Yeah, so right now I've got the CWNE and I've got the CCNP wireless for as long as that's around. I think it's going to be something else in a bit. But the one that I've kind of had my eyes on is the Echa House certified survey engineer training.
Well, I know how to help that one.
Yeah, maybe we could, break from the podcast and have a little study session.
Yeah, glad to do that. Yeah, so there's actually 3 of them now. Since you kind of I set you up, you set me up. There's ECSE design. We had ECSE for a long, long time. Had 4,500 or something people go through that training. Then it's really a wireless design course. It just happened to be on Echo. And then right now, Blake Croney came up with developed the ECSE Advanced, which is for people who have workflow issues. If you have, a team, how you use Echo with a team of people and do some of the more advanced things. And then we just announced a couple weeks ago, well, actually last week, a ECSE troubleshooting that's kind of, I don't want to say below design, but not everyone who needs to design needs to do troubleshooting wireless also needs to do design. So it's focused on probably broader audience of folks who troubleshoot, and then design's focused on those who actually do design networks, and advanced is on those who do lots of design with teams. That's the kind of 3 ECSE classes that are on tap right now.
And are they all going to be in-person trainings like it was before?
Only.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm a little hardcore on that. I don't. If you're going to go and take time to train, you need to focus. I used to own a company. We actually developed online e-learning, and it was a big thing. But what I found after years of developing e-learning, your customers are only one click away from something they want to be doing. So if there's just a little, something slows down or they get a little bored, all of a sudden you lost them. And the actual results from whether or not it changed your life or it changed what you do dropped precipitously in an e-learning rather than a live event. Plus, it's focus. You're sitting in a classroom and you've got nothing else to do. So when you get bored, you might check your email, but the next time your eyes look up, the instructor can see and whether or not you have deer in the headlights and know whether or not to back up and fix what's going on. So I think if you really want good training, instructor-led, hands-on classes. Now, just going to have an instructor read 200 slides doesn't really matter where you get that, but it's the hands-on function and practicing something you don't know about. I'm a instructor-led guy. Then again, like I said in your webinar earlier, I get paid for doing that, so there's obviously a bias there. But I personally I would rather attend a live class than attend a online training class.
No, I feel the same way. I mean, with a formal education kind of thing where you really are taking on kind of advanced concepts and you need to concentrate and really dedicate, an hour or more of concentration to something. You go to a classroom, all the distractions are gone. Somebody's watching you. You can't pull your phone out and start tweeting. And you spend a lot of money, so get your money's worth.
And your boss wants to do that. So I can see how bosses want to send people to online training and basically say, you still have to do your job, but you can do training on the side, and you kind of get what you pay for. So
yeah, for sure.
Well, we'll work out, get you into ECSE class coming up. So if you were going to get a hold of a brand new person who's just started into the wireless industry, what would your top 3 recommendations be for them to look at wireless as a career?
That's a good question. So one is
get a job in K-12, move into the hospital.
So I'd say join the community is the most important thing. It's a very kind of bottom-up organic community of people on Twitter, people on Slack, people in their own personal blogs, just sharing their ideas, and they're really, for the most part, willing to engage with you and answer questions you have. So join the community. Start with the CWNP certifications. I think the foundational theoretical knowledge you get from that is worth 10 times what you learn from the vendor certs, although they've gotten better. The vendor certs shouldn't bash them too much. They're a lot better than they used to be.
But they have the role. I mean, you can learn the generic concept, but how to apply it specifically in this UI or this CLI command, that's very vendor specific, and you're not going to get that in any CWNP course.
Yes, definitely.
Kind of like ECSE, we're teaching design, but the little buttons you click are inside Ekahau. Yeah, the concepts might transfer, but if you go to another tool, Tamosoft or Air Magnet or whatever, the concepts hold true, but the actual punching and clicking and commands are totally different. So I think they both have value and are both useful.
Yeah, and then I guess if I had a third piece of advice, it would be don't read too much into job descriptions. A lot of those come from HR departments that they're not Wi-Fi experts or network experts or even IT experts. So they might have, if there's a place you want to work and they've got a network engineering opening for it and you don't have 2 of the 5 requirements and it doesn't look like a Wi-Fi job, apply anyway, because you might be very surprised. There's a big need for Wi-Fi people all over the US. I see that at 7 Signal constantly. is just a general lack of, or a lot of organizations that are just, we had a Wi-Fi guy for a while, but then we lost him. Now we don't have anybody. It's hard to find good people. And so behind some of those generic job descriptions really are Wi-Fi focused jobs.
I'd like that. I haven't ever had anyone on the podcast recommend that, but that makes perfect sense. And what I see is a lot of people who are really good at Wi-Fi today, that it wasn't in their job description when they first got started, but that's where they're at now. So I like that. That's a good view. Or the reverse is if you see one that's like super Wi-Fi and you need to know everything, you might not. Again, those HR people get a little wishful thinking. Yeah, they want a ACMX, a CCIEW, a CWNE, and 17 years of experience and a PhD. Oh, plus you also know how to do regex and code in Python.
And be a project manager and so on and so forth, yes.
And always have really good, exceptional communications and interpersonal skills.
Yes, absolutely. All of those. Leadership, organization, everything.
So just try it, man. Go out there. Engage. I like your idea. Engage in the community. Don't trust what they say, and get as much training as you can. The more training, the more experience. For me, I think it's a home lab. When did you get your first home lab?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So I've built my home lab myself. So I've bought all my own gear, and I really got started back in my K-12 days back then. But yeah, so I've got my home lab is actually my home network. So like a lot of organizations, I test and prod, and
that means you have a very high SLA.
Yeah, well, and I also
if the wife and kids can't get on, that's like your fault.
It is my fault, and it's like sometimes it's like the cobbler's children's shoes, I think is the metaphor, but we make it work. And we wire a lot of things. So the home entertainment system is all wired. So my Wi-Fi experiments won't affect it.
I unhooked the Wi-Fi from my wife's computer, wired her in, showed her that it was there, and still she calls me, the Wi-Fi's down. Like, no, you're not using Wi-Fi. It's slow. No, it's not. And she's like, you're supposed to be this Wi-Fi guy. How come you can't keep our Wi-Fi running? We live a long way and we have two WISPs and their backhauls are clogged, and no, it's not the Wi-Fi. So I think my whole desire for having a client that anyone could use to see is it a Wi-Fi or non-Wi-Fi issue is so I can answer my wife or my parents or the neighbors who call and let them say, oh, it's not Wi-Fi. So, well and Jim, thanks for taking your time today. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, I was just going to say, that's probably, in my experience, being a former 7-Signal customer, that was my number one use case for Mobileye. Was just, you get a mountain of tickets that got escalated. They said it was a Wi-Fi problem, and there's no supporting data, there's no anything. It's just somebody was complaining about Wi-Fi. So why, how nice is it just to log into the dashboard, pull up their machine, look at the time they said something was wrong, and tell them, hey, you know what? The Wi-Fi was good, the Wi-Fi was not good, or there was a network problem, or there wasn't. There was an application server problem, or you have a device that has old drivers and it roams really poorly, and let me kick this over to field support to go remediate that. So yeah.
Or it could be a design. I mean, we do have design issues, and that's one of the reasons that my first go-to for troubleshooting is that I go and do a validation survey to make sure it's not the RF. Because if it's RF, it's going to manifest itself all over the place with very random pieces. But if we can make the RF infrastructure be the stable part, then we can troubleshoot the other things a little easier.
Absolutely. And, we recognize that, and a couple of our new features that hopefully we'll have this year are going to help. I don't want to say too much, but we're going to shed some light on some of those design issues on the infrastructure just by using Mobileye itself. So it'll be cool.
You're such a tease. We'll have to stay tuned and listen to that. When you got that, we'll have you back for another podcast interview and tell us all about the
happy to.
Well, thanks for your time today, and appreciate that. And how would people find you again on Twitter?
You can find me at Jim Vajda, Jim. That's the easy part. Vajda. DA.
And your blog?
framebyframewifi.net.
Well, thank you very much for
Thanks,
your time.
Keith. Had a great time.
10 Talks.
2 years ago, I talked on something completely non-technical. This year, I was like, I'm doing technical. Went really technical, and then realized there was no way I could do it in 10 minutes. So, same concept, but we're going to scale it back a little bit. This is basically stuff that I've experienced on multiple occasions. In case you don't know, I am not Sam Clements. My name is Jonathan Davis. I go by JD. If you don't know the joke there, you're not watching Center Freaks, which Sam and I co-host. Information that you can later on find on the video. I'm moving right past it. So for the last 10 years, I've been very focused on Wi-Fi, and I've spent a lot of that time in warehouse and manufacturing space, and right now I'm in the government space, and a lot of those really fun wireless environments where you have higher gain antennas and you have unique installations. It's not carpeted office space where every access point's sitting on the ceiling. So when we talk about the standard antenna system components, we talk about a connector at the AP, radio chain, feed line connector, lightning protection connector, feed line and an antenna element, right? And I've seen a lot of mistakes made by reputable, well-respected wireless people in this space. I think a lot of people forget that LMR has loss, and that loss, and really all of the RF characteristics of feed line is not consistent across the bands, right? It affects a lot of things, but if we just look at loss, we've got 6.6 dB of loss per 100 feet for 2.4. When you get in the 5 gig band, notice that the difference between channel 36 and the difference between channel 165, there's 0.8 dB difference there. And if we start thinking forward, in fact, what we should be hearing about right now to 6 gigahertz, it's almost logarithmic. I think on the low side of 6 gig, it's like 12 dB. On the high side of 6 gig, it's like 17 dB. I mean, it falls off a cliff, right? And we're talking about 17 dB of loss, and not only that, but we're talking about such a huge difference, right? So in this situation where you have a DFS event in 5 gig, your receive sensitivity, more importantly, it's less about cell size, it's really more about receive sensitivity here. Just did this just because your access point decided to change channel, right? And this is assuming a perfect feed line in perfect condition, perfect lightning arresters that have not been overused or should have been replaced 5 years ago. This assumes a perfect condition and a perfectly tuned antenna. Now this also affects VISWAR, capacitance and velocity in the cable. There's a whole bunch of other issues there, but we certainly aren't going to talk about in 10 minutes. So real quick question. Beacons, where does the beacon come out from if we assume a 4 radio antenna or AP, where does that beacon come out of? See, for a long time I assumed it was all the radios, but then when I started thinking about that, I realized you cannot do that, right? Because we still have A, B, and G clients that don't understand transmit beamforming in any way, right? So and more importantly, if you tried to send a beacon out, transmit beamforming, your upfade is my null, right? You're getting the benefit of it, but I'm not, but I'm still associated with the access point. So in almost all situations, I've tested, an access point sends out the beacon in a single radio chain. So that's got a lot of, we have to take this a little further in our heads, right? So if we think about a standard patch antenna alignment, and I'm sorry there's not pictures in here, I had pictures to load and there was a problem with them. So if we think about a standard patch antenna, let's go to a warehouse. It's quite common you put the patch antenna at the end of the aisle, shooting down a long aisle, right? But what a lot of people then end up doing is they end up turning that patch antenna 90 degrees, right? Because what you want is you want to cover that long aisle and you want to push almost no RF through the racks into the next aisle. But what happens when you've done that to the antenna element that's sending the beacon? You've now cross-polarized it. It's not a big deal for like an iPhone, right? Small mobile devices, they're built with number one. So our laptop, you've got 3 antennas. You've got one that's at least one that's cross-polarized. No big deal. That iPhone's got a negative dB antenna system to ensure that this doesn't change signal when you turn it sideways, right? But when you go into warehouses, you've got forklifts, you've got tow motors, sometimes they're called, right? And oftentimes they have the mounted computer, and of course there's so much metal around and you don't know what's going on, so the antenna then gets relocated up on top of the cage. And I've seen anywhere from just a standard 2.2 dBi dipole up to a 6, and I even in one warehouse saw 9 dBi antennas. Now we're talking about antennas that are very sensitive to cross polarization, right? So if you have a beacon that's coming out that's being transmitted cross polarized, when it only affects in the beacon frame, right? But how do we decide roaming, right? So the tow motor whips around the corner, it's halfway down the aisle, and it's still seeing 8 to 10 dB less than it should actually see, only because it's cross-polarized. So assuming you actually follow the antenna leads that are labeled, that's the reason they're labeled, right? You're seeing an 8 to 10 dB loss is what I have seen on a regular basis. This is stuff I've tested over the last few years, especially when I was working in manufacturing and warehouse a lot. So you have to actually, number one, know which leads go to which elements, and you have to know how those elements are polarized. So when we went through this earlier, what's missing? Weather protection. This is another one that I've seen time and time and time again. So water invades and destroys RF systems, especially if you're like me and you're in the southeast, anywhere that there's a lot of high humidity. This is something you have to worry about. And one of the things that, due to the daily temperature shifts and barometric pressure shifts, there can be as much as a 1 to 2 psi difference in as little as 2 feet of cable. So now we're not talking long feed line, we're talking about literally our whips that come out of the antenna, right? And so you have an enclosure, you have an external AP, you come out of the whips, that is connected to an antenna. And what happens is due to that up and down temperature is probably the worst, because if you think about it, early in the morning when you've got dew, because everything's condensing, that's also the time when that feed line is the coldest and the air starts to warm up, so water condenses on the feed line. And while that's happening, you now have pressure shift that's taking place. And so what happens is that water gets sucked in and it invades the inside of the cable, and it starts, it'll actually use, depending upon the type of cable, it'll actually use the dielectric as a sponge, and it'll travel down the dielectric, right? So now that we've done that, what we've done is, number one, as it says, we get water plus current plus dissimilar metals, galvanic corrosion at high power. So I also am a ham operator and do some other RF stuff. At high power, you can literally lose the center pin in a day. It will go completely corrode away in a day. At our power, it takes longer. But no matter what, as soon as that starts to corrode, now we're inducing more loss, right? Now it's no longer a 0.9 dB loss, right? Now it's much, much higher, right? The other thing that starts happening is mixed cuts, all of that also makes it easy, but in general, the water, this is important. The water actually invades through the connector most often, right? So if you're not putting the rubber, either the rubber gummy, I get it, you don't want to use the rubber gummy. No one does, that stuff's horrible, it doesn't work well. You come back to replace something years later and it's impossible to get off. There's two things, there's heat shrink, but more importantly, cold shrink. Cold shrink is literally rubber like you would expect. There's a center core around it, or inside of it. You slip it over, you get it in place, you grab the center core, and it literally zips out of the center, and then now it can come down. So you don't need heat, you don't need a source of power or a blowtorch or anything to shrink things down, and you're keeping water out. Because the big thing here is, once you get water inside, right, a few things can happen. The water, as it goes through freeze cycles, it begins to deform your outer shield. And as soon as you do that, now you change the impedance of the cable. And as our impedance changes, now we also are in a situation where we have increased loss, right? If we manage to get a hole in that shield due to freezing, due to the expansion and all that, our signal is now capable, the signal that's traveling on the inside of that shield can make it to the outside of the shield, and it becomes common mode current. That feed line is now a really poorly tuned antenna. So that feed line is actually transmitting your signal that you're trying to make out of an antenna, and if that's happening inside of a building or somewhere you don't want it to be, it further degrades your system. So I'm 40 seconds over. I apologize for that. Thank you for your attention, and think about your antenna systems.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.